Hi, and welcome back to Focal Point AFR Talk, this Wednesday edition, as we get you over the hump in your work week, all downhill from here as we head toward shore leave for the weekend. But that's not till Friday, so you got to stay with us, stay at your post on board the USS Focal Point. I've got a breaking story here that the Inspector General, Special Inspector General Stuart Bowen, has given his final report on Iraqi reconstruction funding. We spent $60 billion with a B, $60 billion in Iraq, and he said it basically was wasted. It's gone, it's shot, largely wasted, didn't solve any of the problems that it was intended to solve. And CBS is even reporting on this. Iraqi officials agree with the assessment. 10 years. Listen to this. And my point here, ladies and gentlemen, is very simple. My point is very simple. We cannot do nation building in a Muslim country. It cannot be done. I could have told you. In fact, I did tell people around me back in 2003 when we went in there. I said, look, if we don't leave behind, if we don't go in there with the purpose of leaving behind religious liberty for Christians, this is going to be a failed enterprise. You know, there's no reason not to go in there. We got a guy that's threatening us. We have reason to believe he's got chemical weapons, weapons of mass destruction. We have every reason to go in there and neutralize that guy. I had no problem with that. And I believe we should have left once we toppled him, pulled the statue down. I think when George Bush went to that aircraft carrier, they had the flag unfurled, said mission accomplished. That was the story. The mission had been accomplished. That was the time. Bring everybody home. Because if you understand anything about Islam, you know that you cannot build a democracy on the foundation of Islam. There is no foundation of liberty. There is no foundation of equality. There is no foundation of biblical morality there. There's no foundation of freedom of speech. There's no foundation of freedom of religion. There's no foundation of freedom of association. All of the things that are a part of the Judeo-Christian tradition that make a democratic form of government, a Republican form of government, to be more precise, all of the things that make those things possible are utterly and completely absent in Islam. They're just not there. It's not in the DNA. Now, it's in our DNA because we are a Christian nation. By origin, by history, by tradition, by value, we are a Christian nation. We are built on the foundation of the Judeo-Christian worldview, truth claims, and value system. And that's why we can have democracy. We can have a Republican form of government. Islam doesn't have that in the DNA. Remember, Paul said, 2 Corinthians 3:17, where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. There is freedom. That's why freedom, we hunger and thirst for freedom. It's in our DNA as a people. That's why we resent what Barack Obama is doing to our country. Not only is it bad politics, it is immoral, and it is contrary to Scripture because he is dampening freedom. He is squashing liberty. He is repressing the American people, and we know that that's wrong because where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is what? Not tyranny, not repression, not oppression, but liberty. Doesn't exist in Islam. It's nowhere to be found. What Islam is about domination. It's about tyranny. It's about totalitarianism. It is about control. It is a dark, evil, malicious religion. That's what it's about. You cannot build a prosperous Republican form of government on that foundation. Cannot be done. And now we spent $60 billion wasted of taxpayer money in a futile effort. People could have told them from the beginning, people that didn't buy this bilge that President Bush did, that this is a religion of peace. I mean, anybody paying attention knows it's not a religion of peace. Look, we have 1,400 years of history. Islam's been around since 622 A.D. We've got 1,400 years of history, and you'd have to be a blind man. You'd have to have an IQ smaller than my hat size. You'd have to be never mind. You'd have to be as dumb as a bag of hammers not to recognize that about Islam. That's the nature of Islam. So I could have, and I did say back in 2003, look, this is going to be a waste of time unless we insist that we leave behind a government that acknowledges, religious liberty because that's the foundational right that God has given the American people. Didn't happen, and consequently, we wasted $60 billion. Here's what the Inspector General says: 10 years and $60 billion in American taxpayer funds later, Iraq, this is 10 years. Iraq is still so unstable and broken that even its leaders question whether U.S. efforts to rebuild the war-torn nation were worth the cost. And that was a total, absolute, abysmal failure. Could have told you that at the very beginning. By the way, just to follow up from yesterday's program, I mentioned that nurses, we played that soundbite of the nurse that let that woman die. She identifies herself as a nurse. Now, the nursing home apparently is out there saying today she wasn't a nurse. Well, she identified herself as a nurse on the phone, so we're going to go with that. And I said the nurses take a Hippocratic oath. It turned out I was not exactly right about that. I've got a Facebook post. You can go to our Facebook. Focal Point is the Facebook page. So go to your own Facebook page, open it up, just put Focal Point in the search bar. It'll pop right up. And we had one of our listeners who was listening to the program yesterday who is a nurse, and she posted this, that nurses do not actually take the Hippocratic Oath. They take what is called the Nightingale Oath, and she says she knows this because she is a nursing student. So the Nightingale Oath, obviously in honor of Florence Nightingale, modified. This thing was composed in 1893 for a training school, a nurse's school in Michigan, and it's called the Florence Nightingale Pledge. And so this is the pledge that nurses take. I solemnly pledge myself before God and in the presence of this assembly to pass my life in purity and to practice my profession faithfully. And here's the last line of the Nightingale Pledge. With loyalty will I endeavor to aid the physician in his work, and here we go, devote myself to the welfare of those committed to my care. Now, that does not mean when you've got a dying patient, you let him expire on the floor because you've got some Mickey Mouse rule about no CPR. So that's the Florence Nightingale Pledge. Now let's go to some sound bites for Rand Paul if we can, Jeff. Let's grab clip number one. This is what I appreciate about Rand Paul. I've got my differences with him, but I tell you, this guy is rock solid, absolute rock solid on the Constitution, and he's rock solid on economic matters, fiscal policy. And here's part of his filibuster against John Brennan. And again, you know, we're not going to spend a lot of time on John Brennan, CIA director. He's not qualified, shouldn't be the guy. He's just in love with Islam. We've played the sound bites before. He cannot stop talking about the wonders of Islam. He calls Jerusalem Al-Quds instead of Jerusalem, calls it by its Islamic name. Guy is completely, absolutely, totally unqualified to be the CIA director. He is in the tank. He's in bed with. He has already prostituted himself toward Islam, completely unqualified. But Rand Paul is concerned about the drone issue, and part of his concerns with Brennan don't really have to do with Brennan. They have to do with this administration and the way it is flouting the United States Constitution, and that's what's animating this filibuster, and this is what he talks about in the very first of his sound bites from the filibuster. Let's listen.
The Constitution was to restrain us. There's always been, since the beginning of time, since we first had government, this desire to restrain the government, to try to keep the government from going too strong, to try to keep the government from taking your rights. It's interesting when you look at the Constitution gave what are called enumerated powers to government, and Madison said that these enumerated powers were few and defined. The liberties you were given, though, are numerous and unlimited. So there's about 17 powers given to government, which we've now transformed into about a gazillion, or at least a million new powers. We don't pay much attention to the enumerated powers or to the Constitution anymore. But the Constitution left your rights as unenumerated. They aren't limited. Your rights are limitless. So when we get to the 9th and 10th Amendment, it says specifically that those rights not granted to your government are left to the states and the people respectively. It didn't list what those rights are. The 14th Amendment talks about privileges and immunities are left to you also. They're to be protected. But I don't think there's a person in America. That's why I can't understand the president's unwillingness to say he's not going to kill non-combatants. Think about that. He's unwilling to say publicly that he's not going to kill non-combatants.
And, what Holder said yesterday, what Eric Holder said in a letter that he sent to a congressman who was asking these questions, I believe it was Senator Paul, he said, yes, under emergency circumstances, the president can order a military strike on an American citizen on American soil. This is a horrible breach of constitutional limitations. And, Senator Paul is exactly right. You go to Article 1, Section 8. We've talked about this repeatedly. In fact, if we wanted to solve our budget problems, here's what I would do. If I was a president, I would veto any budget that contained spending that was not authorized by Article 1, Section 8. Or at a minimum, I would say, look, we're going to have to phase out. Maybe we got to ease into it, got to get on a glide path here. We're going to phase out all spending that's not authorized by Article 1, Section 8. So if you're going to send me a budget, it had better reduce spending. I understand that it could be a kind of a shock to the system if we yank the rug out from under the entire this monstrosity we built. I understand we may need to dismantle this thing kind of in an orderly fashion, so I'm okay with that. I understand that. But if you send me a budget that does not reduce spending in every single area that is not authorized by Article 1, Section 8, I'm going to veto that puppy. Now, you can override my veto. It'll take a two-thirds vote to do it, but you're going to have to do it. I am done, as President of the United States, I am done with authorizing spending that is not authorized by the Constitution. Now, there's a lot of things that the Constitution, powers of action that the Constitution gives to the central government. But you can look through Article 1, Section 8. There's nothing about education in there, not a single thing. There's nothing about energy in there. There's nothing about agriculture in there. There's nothing about manufacturing in there. There's nothing about managing the nation's financial system. Nothing is in there about any of those things. And that would be one of the ways to get things under control. And Rand Paul says, look, the way the Constitution was designed is that the powers that were given to the federal government, as James Madison said in Federalist Paper 45, the powers given to the central government were few and defined. The rights that were preserved for the states were numerous and indefinite. Now what we've got is the federal government with numerous and indefinite powers upside down. Focal Point AFR Talk.